And over time, I was like, man, the missing link in growth is this moment in time where you need to reflect and really think about who are you today? What makes you unique and different? And in a way that is framed in your own sort of successes.
Well, today I talk with the incredible Seema Alexander. She is co-chair and head of growth at DC Startup and Tech Week that's going on this coming week in Washington, D.C. It's October 21st to the 26th. Seema is heading up the AI track that is not to be missed. She talks all about the events that are happening this week, as well as her own history and adventures in apps and AI. Tune in. This is a great episode.
Technology-wise, it was one of my uncles. They started a company, it's still around, it's called Electronica. And I remember it was like my high school graduation. He gifted me my first laptop. And it's really interesting, Paul, because I think we're in this really crazy phase right now when it comes to, we'll get into AI, but it was like that first moment where I'm like, oh, man meets machine, and I hated writing. Like for me, it's like my handwriting looks like a doctor, typing and just everything being so clear. And then obviously the internet, everything changed, right? Like it was just, we used to have, I don't know if it was Britannica, but you remember Encyclopedia.
Encarta.
Yeah, it was one of the, we had 20 books, mind blown, right? It was all over this one part of the house. And I'm like, I don't need that anymore. It's crazy. So
no, we were the same way. So when I grew up, we didn't have much money at all, but my dad was in tech, he was an IT manager, and he showed up one Easter or Christmas or something with a computer for work with Encarta on it. And the same thing, it was mind blowing. I always wanted those 30, 40 books, encyclopedias, and finally we had it all inside a compact disc. It was insane.
Yeah, the compact discs. Yes, I love that.
And now we're doing it all over again. But we'll get into the AI stuff. Tell me about your career. You started in the corporate world. So you finished college and went to Prudential. Walk me through that, and then walk me out of it again.
Yeah. So I stayed at home for college. I worked my way through college, all the things. And I was like, I never left, and I really want New York City. I just wanted to experience New York. I always thought it was a place that had so much energy and so much life. And then so I started applying, and I wanted to get into a leadership development program because I knew I was marketing and finance undergrad, but I was I knew sort of the direction I wanted to go, but I didn't know exactly. Yeah. And so it was one of those really, I don't believe in coincidences. So I went on this interview. The hiring manager interviewed me on the spot, literally on my way home in Amtrak. They called me and hired me. It was amazing. Wow. And I was part of their leadership development program for 2.5 years. And then I was an anomaly in my generation, stayed about 13 years in one company and 5 of their businesses. And as I was progressing, my goal was to become a CMO of that Fortune 500. And they had CMOs of all the different businesses. But within that, I got to experience some really amazing things. We haven't talked about sort of the history of my obsession with business growth because of my parents doing really well and going close to bankruptcy 20 years later. But in this, so I always kind of went into corporate America with an entrepreneurial mindset, if that makes sense. So truly an entrepreneur in many ways. But I got to work on this really amazing opportunity where we were repositioning Prudential Financial as a whole company, right? If you guys remember back in the day, it was all, and still a lot of ways, it's it was this old stodgy insurance company, and they were in 7 businesses and extremely doing well in pension risk transfer and international, all the things. And the whole exercise was to how do you get seen? How do you position yourself to be seen as a leader in where you want to actually be seen, not in the older ways that once was, right?
Yeah.
That was it was an amazing experience because it was from the market research to the focus groups to the social proof to the strategic aspect of how we want to be seen to the implications to the business model, marketing, branding, partnerships, right? Working with the CEO and all the CMOs, we led that initiative, and it was a game changer. It was award-winning repositioning. I learned a lot. And then I took that, Paul, for me, my goal was I was right under the CMO. Actually, I left that role to get more P&L experience so I could become more in that world of leadership. And I was in the retirement business, and at 36, I had my first of two pulmonary embolisms. I call it like a
Oh,
midlife awakening.
yeah, yeah,
And so it was between both of my kids. I almost, like, truly almost died. It was a really
yeah,
crazy experience,
yeah.
and it came out of nowhere. Um, and again, I go back to I'm a believer of no coincidences. So I'm like, okay, what's God telling me? What's the sign here? Like,
Yeah.
And at that point, I was already side hustling, working with a lot of entrepreneurs and scaling and branding and all the things. And I was like, maybe it's my time to, like, leave Prue and start something of my own. And that's sort of when I took the leap.
That's awesome. That's funny. I thought you were going to come in here telling me about how you sogged it away in the corporate world and you just had to escape. But in many ways, like that sounds like an incredible experience, and really, you seem focused throughout it, and it set you up for the next level. It really, it was an intentional choice of or part of, I guess, a stepping stone that kind of made sense. And at this point, obviously, a major life event makes you look at everything and decide what the next steps are, and it led straight into it. And that was like so. So was that straight into disruptive advisory role, or
Yeah.
was there a space in between?
There was a little space. I ended up working in two health and wellness startups initially,
Yeah,
all in business growth and strategy and brand building and all the things. And that's when I like bit into entrepreneurship in a different way, right? Because you have a different sort of ethic when it comes to corporate. And I think I've always been one of those people that if I have to get it done, I get it done. It doesn't matter. It's just reputation is
yeah,
everything. But it was more than that, because it was like you are janitor and chief and you have to deal with all of it and you don't really have
yep,
a real budget. And so I think at that time I had my second kid, but I was just like excited. I was excited about those opportunities, right? And
yeah,
making that progress and impact on those companies. Was really deep into the second one. 2 years into it, the CEO gets a divorce and everything fell apart. And it
well,
was such a learning for me, because I was like, wow, like, you invest so much time in startups and it doesn't, like, always work out, like, and I
oh,
didn't until
totally,
you feel it, you don't know. And then
yeah,
that's when I was like, I got to go on my own. I wanted to start my own advisory practice. And that's when I took that next leap.
very
Real
cool. And then, so working, I know you've got the unique method. I want to hear about that in your own words.
driven.
And I also am curious to hear about some of the clients that you've interacted with, how that's worked for them, or what you've learned from them as well as they've learned from you. So start with the unique method, how that came about, and then sort of like maybe if you have an example of someone you feel like really, you know, felt empowered by that and
Yeah.
or
So I love this. Okay. So going back to this whole theory at Prudential of, like, we went through this repositioning exercise, and when we did it, I was like, wow, we actually went through what are we good at? What are we not good at? Looked at the clients, looked at the market, did a lot of analysis with actual data, right? It wasn't like assumptions or all the things. And at that moment, I had already had that. Well, what if entrepreneurs? I feel like that's what they're missing in growth. Everybody
yeah,
goes to
yeah,
people, process, technology to scale. But because of and disruptive, so it was an advisory practice. In the beginning, I worked with over 1,000 founders and worked on everything from their business model refinement to their brand positioning to their growth strategy. And over time, I was like, man, the missing link in growth is this moment in time where you need to reflect and really think about, who are you today? What makes you unique and different? And in a
yeah,
way that is framed in your own sort of successes, right? Because there comes a time in business, and Paul, you've been in business well. We've had this conversation, right? It's like the first couple years, you're kind of throwing spaghetti against the wall. You're trying to figure it out, right? And you can keep going to path and say yes to every customer and just focus on revenue because that's what you need to do. But the people that actually step back and reflect on these really important strategic questions, which takes time. It's not easy, especially if you're a mid-sized company or, and we'll talk about some of those examples. But when you do, you get clear on these sort of core aspects. And part of it is not only who you say yes to and who you want to attract more of, but who you say no to. Like,
totally, totally,
then all of a sudden your marketing and your branding and your partnerships becomes that much more intentional. And
yeah,
so for me, the unique method is a 6-step strategic process that I've taken over 1,000 founders and CEOs through workshops and accelerators and one-on-one consulting and advisory. And the point of it was they were using, again, their own data, but their own experiences over the last, call it 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, it could be at a core inflection point in their company. And if they were sort of that lean entrepreneur, it was working, getting them to reflect on those things. But a lot of these are medium-sized companies. So you had to bring in, the core team, but also the people that are working with the customers themselves. So you're getting a holistic picture, not just sort of this myopic, this is how it should be, right? You're getting a real purview. I'll give you a couple examples. I'll do one on the for-profit and the one on the nonprofit. Okay.
Perfect.
So let's start with the one on the nonprofit. It's something that's near and dear to my heart. So I'm on the board of an organization called CODESPA. CODESPA is been around. It's actually the honorary president is the King of Spain, and I got to meet him through this process, which was insane and amazing. But the beauty of CODESPA is it has this entrepreneurship flair. So they go into the most vulnerable areas in Latin America, Africa, and Asia. And they work with the indigenous people to help create entrepreneurial training based on what is available to them there to create a business per se, right? And so what does that mean? They've been into Peru. Peru has cocoa, like the chocolates. Not only do they help them create the chocolate and train them, what they do is I don't know if you've ever heard the analogy. Right. You give somebody a fish and, they'll fish and they'll eat for a day. You teach somebody how to fish, they'll eat for life. But they actually teach them how to become fish merchants. And so it goes to that whole next level of sustainability when it comes to the space of turning people from poverty to prosperity. And that was part of the unique method. So I'll share a little bit. So anyway, This organization's been around 36 years at this time. They were doing really well, but they weren't doing really well, if that made sense. The impact was insane. Yeah. And so, but the way they told their story, the way that their proposals were, everything was always different. It wasn't the core of what made them unique and different. And because they've had 36 years of experience, they were clearly experts in a lot of things. And so we went through this process and we created something called the CODE method. It was a 4-step process of how they truly go into these countries and do it very differently. And to this day, they've presented the methodology, which then now has become much more intentional in terms of the grants they go after, the partnerships that they've created, the way they speak about their organization, the impact, and makes them very different than all these other international development organizations. They've won millions of dollars worth of grants and opportunities. And the way that the CEO then has just changed his sort of perspective and is almost the momentum and confidence that has come through that has been, it was the most, literally he cried. I have a video of him crying of you captured us in ways that we couldn't, right? And that was a moment, Paul, that I was I knew I was onto something, from a for-profit perspective, let's use a 10-year-old management consulting company. It's called Reinvigoration. It's a UK-based company. And amazing co-founders, just really good, hardworking people, really believed in what they do. And their focus was corporate America, operational management or management consulting, if you will. And so when they first came to me, they were positioned like a true just management consulting, competing against the top 4, right? And you really go into them and you're it doesn't work the way that they were doing it, competing against the top 4. They're actually very brilliant in the world of the operation side, and what we, again, going through the process, we came up with them, their core audience, who they no longer serve, refined their service offering, got them to understand what their framework is. And then 1 year later, now it's 2 years later, this is I can't wait to have him on my podcast. But I mean, again, millions of dollars in revenue. They've changed their business model. They've become known. They're out in the market being seen as thought leaders in their space, right? And and you can do, it doesn't matter if you're a solopreneur to a mid-sized growth company, when you're clear, and this actually, it was really fun for me, is in both of these times, the employees got reinvigorated, right? Yeah. Because they're all of a sudden you have this big vision and you're excited about it, you're going after something. It brings this rally cry to the purpose of why you're doing what you're doing as part of the process, and what makes you unique.
Well, let me ask, the amazing example. I think I love the startup one too, and I think it's really interesting to look at both sides and how there's, at the end of the day, every organization needs to survive, and they need to be able to tell their story. Yeah. And like you say, the positioning is everything, right? If you don't target, if you don't know who you want to market to? How on earth can you find them, and how can you tell the right story that they want to hear?
But Paul, can I just one before you go there? I think the bigger problem is that people do really, really good work. And because they don't know how to articulate what makes them unique and different, they look like everybody else. And when they do that, it's like, oh, they're just another international development corporation. We have 5, 10 others that look just like them. And to me, that's the big miss. When I know they have this uniqueness about them, they have a problem that they can solve consistently. And if you don't identify that for yourself, then how is anybody else going to say they're better than this group, right? Like, let's give them the grant versus that, or let's give them the contract versus them, because or else that to me is the bigger pain point is entrepreneurs work really hard, and because they don't do this and reflect, they miss out on really great opportunities to scale and almost breathe. Yeah.
Well, those examples are sort of like established businesses that have been around, and I think you're bringing almost, modernizing their outlook, as well as like really prioritizing their message.
Yes.
Let me talk about, because how do you shift then towards like startup land?
Yeah.
Because you have these, larger successful companies been around a while, and then you have like an idea or a startup that's like trying to find product market fit, trying to break into the system. How did you suddenly find yourself veering towards startup land?
Yeah. So I lived in New York, right? After college, I was in New York for 17 years. And then I moved back to the DC metro area 7 years ago.
Yeah.
And then the story goes that I was like, man, everything is like government contracting and politics. I did I ended up living in the neighborhoods of Bethesda, Maryland. And like, it was just different, right? But while all this was happening, I was like, man, there's like this big change in the DMV, because this is when originally Amazon HQ2 was supposed to be in Long Island City, and we were paying very close attention to that because we lived right there, to now moving to Northern Virginia, and then coming back, and I was like, man, there's like biotech is starting to become big here, and then Northern Virginia, obviously the data center alley in that world, and then DC has like always been sort of this plethora, but I got into Web3 and AI and all the things. So like I knew there were pockets of all this stuff occurring. And then I had a true identity crisis when I moved back. Like I was like, I don't know where I fit in. I don't know where to get my clients. Like it was all of the things. And I ended up being asked to speak at DC Startup Week and now DC Startup and Tech Week, probably in their third year, right? And I sat there on this panel, and it was on like customer journey and growth and whatever. And I was like, man, like these are the people, like this is the 1%ers I've been seeking, the innovators, the change makers. Like, but I'm building real companies. I can do this. Like, and this is and I've done a lot of that world entrepreneurial community stuff in New York. And so it was really refreshing. I met with the co-organizer at the time and Rachel now. And I was like, I want to be part of this. I can, volunteered for a while and then quickly became one of the co-organizers and then co-chairs, because this is something that's bigger than me in a lot of ways. And so to your question, from a unique method perspective, the startup ecosystem, they're in spaghetti phase. Like, it's like, it's too early when you're year 1, year 2, year 3. Yes. Like, and so it's interesting because it's not truly an ideal client for me if you think about the unique method, but the other parts of sort of the community and innovation and growth of the ecosystem, it just took me by storm, and I was like, I can do this, I can grow this, and the bigger vision is to become the South by Southwest of this Mid-Atlantic region. So,
well, the community building is spectacular. 3 Advance was born out of DC Tech Week, which was back in 2010. I don't know if you heard about that, but I literally I got my green card, immigrant story too. Got my green card, quit my job the next day pretty much, and then decided I wanted to make iPhone apps. And believe it or not, my first iPhone app, I was paid in hot dogs and chili dogs from Ben's Chili Bowl because I had made an app for an app contest as part of DC Tech, which seems so rudimentary. It was fun, but like that one event was like, it rocketed my business, and a couple months later, I've got a contract with Special Olympics International. I'm working at NPR. I'm known in the community, which is like, out of nowhere. So the value of that was huge. And there was a bustling community, and there has been, but there was a gulf in like, what's the event? What's what are we rallying around every year? What do we get excited about? And
Yeah.
then DC Startup Week appears, and I'm like, you
Yeah.
know, at the time, and this is probably as well, going through having kids, whatever else, I had done a lot in the community. I'd organized meetups. I'd done all this fun stuff back in the day. And then kids, and I'm like, time for this stuff.
Yeah.
And DC Startup Week is going boom, but I'm like, thankfully, someone is doing this and really doing it, not just, really doing it. And, hats off to Rachel. And you got in there after a couple of years. You probably saw the great things they were doing and realized, you could really have an impact. And
yeah, I mean, for me, I'm an operator, and I have, we have complementary skill sets in a lot of ways, and similar skill sets in other ways. But like, I'm a visionary too. Like, we have this like interesting I don't know, partnership. It is interesting, but it's bigger than us, like, for sure. But like the first couple of years, it was like their first year was like they had 100 people, come or whatever. And the second year, so it was like starting to build. But she's very good at sort of the event planning side of things and all that. And sees the big picture. But for me, it's like this is an opportunity. Also, now we both see it as like we're making the DC, Maryland, Virginia, the biggest innovation hub and connecting the dots. I think one of my superpowers is like, you guys don't know each other. That's not like, it's like, I think in corporate America, I learned the issues with working in silos. Like, it was like, and I feel like many people continue to do that in any industry. And the more you can connect those dots, magic and innovation actually happens. Like, because everybody's trying to work on some of the similar stuff. And I'm like, okay, why? Like, you guys are like, it's interesting. So I think there's a lot of impact. And you'll see, like, I curate a lot of my content on when it's like my tracks and stuff, and AI is going to be a big one this year. But I know these individuals personally. Like, I know what they're all about. I know what they've done in their careers. I know their passions. And I think that to me is one of the most important. It's like, not just putting people on panels to put people on panels. It's like really curating so you're telling a narrative that you want to share with the community.
And Seema, talk about is it a major rebranding? And again, talk about like messaging and setting up yourself up. So tell me the story of why things changed. Why are things different this year? And walk me through the conversations that kicked that off, and then what's happening this year to really stand out from previous years.
I think from the beginning, Cheetah also, he was one of the original folks who worked with Rachel on this, and he had a whole focus on DevFest, which was, he's a partner, right? And in terms of an AI and ML expert and all that. So for years, there was like DevFest associated with DC Startup Week. When I came about, I brought the emerging tech side. So I was heavy into Web3 and smart cities and all those things that like we had technology track, but didn't have the emerging technology piece, And I think as we started to evolve over the last couple of years, and obviously you and I know very well where we're headed with AI. And then there was all this effort too. I don't know if you know Evan, he used to run 1776, now the Washington office and stuff, and where they're actually going to be speaking to, where they're focused on why DC is the best place for frontier tech, right? And we do have this government side of like, obviously one of the biggest funders, but for national defense and security. And so part of it was like, let's rebrand us to who we actually are, going back to the unique method, right? And own it, right? Because the beauty of us is that we are not all tech, right? I've been a service provider for years of my life, right? Like, but you can't grow a company without experts, So we have the startup and creative ecosystem as well as the tech side. And we're going to go into deep tech and looking at those opportunities as well. So honestly, Paul, it was like, we just wanted to own who we were. That's really what it came down to.
And Seema, what opportunities has that brought? Like, has that helped with sponsorship? Has it helped with elevation in the across the DMV area? Because it seems the obvious thing is there's more to offer. But in terms of like growing, the whole movement and what you and Rachel and the team are trying to do here, like, does this help you with the grand mission? Like, does it fill into that?
I think so. I mean, we just announced the rebrand less than a month ago, right? It's like everything is happening. This is the crazy part. Is like, because I'm a co-founder and president of a company. Rachel owns a a 10-year-old, tech startup is that's in growth mode, right? So this has
Yeah.
initially been our side hustle and like a big one. Like literally, we don't sleep. It's like so
Right.
much work,
Believe
but
it.
it's like it needs infrastructure, right? Now it's like, how do we now move from this bootstrap model to something more
Yep.
of a structured, hire real people and like been showcasing the economic impact it's had over the years. But, we need larger sponsors. We need, like, we've proven ourselves. Next year's our 10-year mark. It's crazy, right?
Yeah.
But I think we are starting to see it, Paul. It's new, right? Like the rebrand, but that's the intention. It's having different sorts of conversations. But part of it is that we need to find additional ways of funding. So not only can we build the infrastructure, pay something for ourselves, which would be helpful too, but it's more of like be able to take this next phase of what we know where this region is and where the opportunities lie.
Yeah.
Because we've created the foundation in amazing ways, but
Yeah.
there's definitely some gaps and challenges like anything else, right? Because we're lean, we're super lean.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I'm super excited. This is being recorded the week before DC Startup Week and DC Startup and Tech Week, and we're rushing out the podcast, so it's released this weekend because we want to promote it and we want to connect ourselves to it, and our team will be on the ground doing some fun things as well. I really can't wait, and we've got to get the booth next Thursday, so we're all excited about it. A few people flying in from out of town, part of the team, so we're
Yay.
really excited about it. And it always is. It's always a great thing, and I'm really excited to see the changes this year and sort of like how the tentacles, where they're going and how this whole thing is going. Like you say, it's so hard to run events. It's so hard to sustain it, and the fact that it's grown every year is a huge success because it's freaking hard.
Yeah.
It's really hard.
Yeah. And give us
Seema,
some grace if there's some gaps here and there, okay? Like, we're trying new things here, so.
Some of the exciting things are also some of the more challenging things. Like you're in different venues all the time, which I think is a really good thing for the town or for different areas and to see what's happening in different parts of the area. Like I think it's important, but I'm sure that brings its own crazy challenges as well. It's a mixed
Our
bag.
production team, everybody's like, can you guys make yourselves 3 days and be a venue at least 2 days? Like, because it costs money, and labor's gone up, production has gone up. And so it is a thing. And obviously it is, but it's interesting because like day 2 of this year, we're going to be in Arlington for the first time in this capacity. We were at Sands Capitol one year in their building, but we're going to be in 5 buildings. It's almost like a festival. Like we're going to see how this energy works, but they were really great partners, right? And it's Arlington, VIPC, Alexandria, the National Lending Bid, and JBG Smith, right? So I think what's been really cool this year is like we're trying new things. We have like day 1 is in a very elevated venue, which then again has additional costs and production value, which we never really had to do in the past, but that's where I'm curating my AI track. So I'm super excited in the afternoon that day. All of it, like all the tracks are going to be so good. CPG Expo, all the things. But I think that's the other thing. It's like we're not those traditional, let's go to a convention center and hotel people either. Like we want the startups to feel like innovative, fun, creative spaces to do your thing, right? And there's limited space and in DC and Maryland, Virginia anyway, and stuff like that. And pricing has gone up. So yes, going back to why we need additional support.
Well, let me ask you, before you finish this podcast, we need to get into AI a little bit. You said something earlier that I got to bring up. You said we both know where it's going.
Yeah.
I'll put my hand up here because I often don't know where it's going. I'll wake up one day thinking I had it all figured out, and the next day it's all up in the air. Tell me a little bit about what you see in the world today with AI and the opportunities, and where you think from society to business changes, what you see coming.
I'm starting off my talk and I haven't put my words fully together, but AI is bigger than the advent of the internet. Do you believe me now? That's my talk. All right.
Yeah.
And
I believe you, by the way, just ahead of the whole talk. Yes.
I know you do because, we talked about the laptops and what that looked like in the 90s and what that started to open up. And, there have been iterations of like social and digital and all those things. But a couple of years ago, because I was advising this AI startup, specifically an artificial intelligence development environment that specialized in this concept of AI agents, which you were in the world of when the internet came out, you were working on apps. AI agents is going to be the new apps, if you will, but much more powerful because it can focus on the simple sort of task-oriented things to automations and autonomous automations over time, right? From personalization to unique customer experiences, leveraging data in ways that we never once thought possible, structured and unstructured, right? And we can go into all of that more technically, but at the end of the day, and as long as inference costs come down, that should be the world that we're going to be going toward, right? But I think from a business perspective, I'm sounding the alarm because I guess I am in the know, and I think you're in the know of like what people are working on, what automations they're trying to do, what ways they're trying to leverage their data to create unique customer experiences. And, and I think one of the things I learned through Magic was like all of a sudden you can take all these multiple things that you've been doing and create something, a workflow, then I don't have to do all the busy work. That's just one small concept of it. But then when you start actually adding AI skill sets toward it, everything can change. So one of the cool things why I'm super excited about DC Startup and Tech Week and specifically day one of the AI track is I'm doing show and tell. Like the whole thing is about show and tell. So I have people doing like AWS coming in and doing Gen AI / leading edge use case demos. I have a panel I'm moderating on disruptive AI startups but from folks that are disrupting market research and using multimodal and intent recognition to moving on to robotics and autonomous drones. Like there's so many different use cases when it comes to AI, right? And so people just need to understand, and I think it's not fully crossed the chasm because people are still afraid and there's a lot of uncertainty, but there's a lot that you can do today, right? And I think that's the stuff that even in that and even understanding what that looks like allows us to understand that I think Sam Altman said it, we're at a 1.5 moment in terms of AI, right? Out of 5. And think about the power of what that can look like going forward.
Yeah. What advice would you have for a startup, whether it's a traditional SaaS or whatever startup coming into a world where it's being disrupted by AI? Would you encourage like founders to look at things differently? And, are there more opportunities? Are there less opportunities? How does it look?
With AI in general?
Yeah, generally, like for startups that have been around, the type of like SaaS or marketplaces or even consumer-based startups over the last few years, I guess, even 15, 20 years, how have things changed now within the advent of generative AI? Do you think people should look at the world differently if they're thinking about starting a business?
100%, like 1,000%, Paul. Like, again, I go back to the reason I'm curating all this content and getting people to understand is because, look, I was on the screening committee for Techstars, right? 8 out of 10 of the businesses all have AI frameworks in them. Like, they're not always all strategic and not always all thoughtful, right? But they're thinking about how do you leverage either Gen AI or just in general machine learning or use my data differently to actually give me help me with decision making. I have, I just interviewed Mark Stern, who is the CEO of University Startups, and they have their CTO created an internal sales agent where they can, just by listening to the intent and the intonation of somebody on the call, they can tell, this person's actually they would want to learn more about what we're doing, and scrape the internet and understand, like, are they actually decision makers? And he's like, that's been game changing because out of these thousands of calls, now we have a handful that we focus on and we close, right? And so I think this is the biggest opportunity for entrepreneurs, hands down, but they have to do it. They have to be educated. They have to do it safely and they have to do it responsibly. And I think those are the key things of like, it's not invention for invention's sake, right?
Yeah.
It's invention for intention's sake. Ooh, that's but it's also like, and that's something I'm going to share a lot of. We have this really cool responsible AI debate panel that's going to happen that day. But it's also where I'm afraid people are going to be left behind, Paul, right?
Yeah.
So going back to my parents' business, and this is sort of the passion, right? It's like, in the 90s, the rise of the internet, now your businesses went from brick and mortar to having these digital components to full-on digital companies, right? And that just meant like you move from the Blockbusters to Netflix, and where's Blockbuster today, right? You move from the Yellow Pages to Yelp. Where is Yellow Pages today? You go from Kodak to everything digital when it comes to film from iPhones, right? And I remember hearing the CMO of Kodak speak in the times when I was at Prudential at this brand managed camp conference, and he was sharing the story of like they weren't paying attention.
Yeah.
They didn't believe it. And I think that is the problem. Not the problem. It's like that's what I'm very passionate about, because this is sort of the intersection of all my experiences of like, I need to now share this. So that's also why we created Emergent, because now it's like we need to help people understand how to use this technology, and then how do you build things that are, actually possible, right?
This leads me to a question that probably ties in with Vergent and companies like 3Advance. And what advice would you have for founders that are thinking about a startup, or they have already, started doing research or implementation? What advice would you have around AI and how to brush up on things or understand the landscape? Or where do they start?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm a big person. Like, look, when you're a startup, go after those $20 subscriptions. I mean, obviously ChatGPT and Perplexity, like I feel like there's a lot of people who don't know the foundations of like what's best to use for what LLM in that, like, because Perplexity is better with research, right? Gemini has its own things like ChatGPT Pro. Like there's so many different variations. So that alone is a game changer, right? But
Yep.
there are a lot of, there are some just ChatGPT wrapper companies out there, and some of them actually can work well, right? Until they may or may not, right? But
Yep.
for me, it's like the startups need to use it for automation, workflow, anything to help them, because you are a janitor in chief. Actually, if this is probably one of the best times if you actually have the right tooling, that you don't have to do everything on your own, because you're going to have agents or these support mechanisms, AI support mechanisms to help you create content and create like a brand. You can it's like pretty insane what is
Yeah.
available to a new startup, right? But it is education, it is optimization of those tools. So there's one thing to use ChatGPT, it's another thing to optimize how do you use the right prompts to get to where you're trying to go, creating your own custom agent in the back end of it, so then you don't have to start over every time. I mean, these are things that if you're serious about just that first phase, right, of playing. But then the second part is when you're thinking about your pain point that you're solving for, can AI, ML play a role in that, right? And without education, without upskilling yourself, even if it comes to, all right, what does it mean about intent recognition? What does multimodal mean? What are these like concepts people are talking about these days, or you've never even heard of at this point, right? Like,
Yeah.
the other thing is like there are a lot of companies that have integrated AI and you don't even know it. It's seamlessly integrated. And over time, that's exactly what it's going to be. You're not talking about, oh, is AI enabled? Like, that's actually, it's almost like just create the experience, like, and people will be wowed. And I think this is probably one of the biggest opportunities to wow people because of the possibilities that you actually create something.
Well, I feel even just building prototypes and even applications, even functional apps right now is like, it's so super, super cheap. And I think people don't realize that unless like, within Vergent and within your, you understand this, like with Claude and OpenAI, and you can produce proof of concepts and functional MVPs really, really quickly. And that's how, certainly at 3Advance, our model is changing how we work, because a lot of the time we're not going in with these big builds.
Yeah.
We're going in to build very quickly within a few weeks and produce something that's functional very cheaply, because it's that, I don't want to say easy. You can't do it. Having the coding background really, really helps.
Of course.
And knowing to put these things together. But you can get to feedback so much faster and so much cheaper. It's incredible. Yeah.
The only thing I would add there, Paul, is I think you're absolutely right. I mean, there's so many now coders have ways to do no code coding. Like, like there's this amazing tool sets out there. But I think what I found is that people don't even they don't want anything to do with coding, right? They don't want nothing to do, like, there's still this like new world of solutions architecture that's coming, right?
Totally.
Using these new tools.
Yes,
right?
yes.
And I think it's like, that's where a lot of opportunity also lies in terms of workforce and, in terms of skills, in terms of like what you do with 3Advance. Like, I love what you guys do and what you've been doing. Your reputation is solid in the industry and the startups ecosystem. And so that's why I love hanging out with people like you, because in a way, like we understand what's happening and we're educating as well. Right. And I think we have that responsibility because we know.
Totally. It's responsibility and it's opportunity.
Yep.
It's a really exciting time to be here, but also like, I see this with you and Virgin and staying ahead of the curve and making sure that you know what's happening, being on, I guess, leading edge and bleeding edge, and making sure that, you're both advising people in what directions they can go, but also, making sure that they know it's, safety and regulations and the pitfalls and everything else that goes with it, especially working with, larger organizations that, have a responsibility and can't just, move fast and break things.
Yeah. I think our goal is to be leading edge. And the reason why is bleeding edge is really hard pill for a lot of people to swallow. And there's still a lot of uncertainty, right? And I think to your point, being in the know of what's happening bleeding edge, 100%, right? But when it comes to customer implementations, I think, and because it's just a risk of it all, like that's the part of what I'm trying to tell people is like, there's a lot you can do today and it's actually safe. And here's how you do it. Like, but it's more the inference costs and all those other pieces that still need to be figured out with usage. And, those are things that will evolve over time and get cheaper over time. But this is first mover's advantage. It's more than that right now, right?
Yeah. Well, I am sure that with the agenda for next week, there's going to be a hell of a lot of education and insights in the topic starting Monday. Seema, as I wrap it up, do you want to give the last pitch to get people out there on Monday, all week next week for DC Startup and Tech Week?
Absolutely. Listen, if you're an aspiring entrepreneur, a growth stage entrepreneur, an investor, an ecosystem partner, somebody who's just curious about what's happening in this world of entrepreneurship and business, right? And, you can be in consumer packaged goods to a new track. We have cannabis, life sciences, mental health and wellness, like technology, AI. AI is going to be all over in every track because it's that important, right? We have a startup showcase and business resource expo on Thursday that you'll be able to come and meet people who are actually creating expert services or help you with funding with businesses or all the things, right? We have, this Tuesday, we're going to be in Arlington, like this festival-like component that we've never tried before. But every night there are amazing activations. Monday, we're going to be at Capital Turnaround. Tuesday, we're going to be in Arlington at the Water Bar. Wednesday, we're at Martin Luther King Library. Thursday, we are at International Square. Friday, we're at Eaton Hotel. Like, there's something for everybody. And the more you invest in yourself during this week, that means, yes, you're taking time away from building your company or whatever it may be, but you're not, because this is actually real great opportunities to build partnerships, find co-founders, find investors. Like, how many stories Rachel and I have heard of, we're a product of DC Startup Week and now DC Startup and Tech Week. Thank you, right? And it's like, part of it is I tell them, I was like, you showed up. Like, I didn't do anything. We gave you a platform, but you showed up. So www.DCSTW.com or DC Startup Week, DC Startup and Tech Week.com. You can even go to DCStartupWeek.org. The past one, they all go back to that website. It's nominal. This is a conference worth thousands of dollars. You get it for $127. It's like for the whole week. It's crazy. It's crazy.
Well, listen, Seema Alexander, thank you so much for joining me. Everybody, please make it to DC Startup and Tech Week next week. And a big shout out to Seema for your own podcast. I know From Spaghetti to Growth. I love your podcast. It is so awesome. So tune into that too. Everyone else, thank you for joining us on this episode of What's Happening. We're all about Seema's adventures in apps and AI. Podcast is brought to you by 3Advance. It's the development team for startups. To learn more, go to 3advance.com and check out the What's Happening newsletter. That's what'shappening.tech. It's for founders. It's the ultimate guide week to week, bite-sized chunks for everyone to understand. Keep up to date with AI, startups, tech, all this fun stuff that Seema and I talked about today. Until then, enjoy DC Startup and Tech Week. And Seema, thank you again for joining me.
Thank you, Paul. Appreciate you.